And I can't hide. These growing pains are keeping me up at night.
The information that we share today is from our own personal experiences and does not constitute medical advice. We do not endorse any products or services. Any said products or services mentioned on this podcast may not be suitable for you or your condition. Please consult with your physician if you have medical questions as it may pertain to your condition.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Take a Paycheck. I'm so excited to introduce this week's guest, Jody Shea. Jody is a clinical research coordinator at IQVIA in Boston, Massachusetts, and she has worked in the orthopedic surgery department at Boston Children's Hospital, where she conducted several clinical research studies for children with cerebral palsy. Hi Jody, I'm so happy to have you on today. Can you start off by introducing yourself, not like the long introduction I just did, but like a brief introduction and your condition?
Of course. Thank you so much, Natasha. I really appreciate you inviting me to come on. This is so awesome. So like you said, my name is Jody. I live in Boston currently, and I was diagnosed with seropositive rheumatoid arthritis when I was 17.
Did you ever transition because you were 17, like from pediatric to adult care, or were you just like, I'm in adult care?
Yeah, so 17 is kind of a really awkward age to get diagnosed, especially because I was a freshman in college. So like by all intents and purposes, I was an adult functioning in society. But when I first got sick, I was still going to my pediatrician, even though I was in college. I was started out in pediatric care and then transitioned into adult care probably when I honestly was like 23, 22.
Oh, really?
Much too old. Yeah.
That's kind of interesting because like 23 is like you shouldn't be in pediatric care, but like I'm 18 and I'm in pediatric care. So I mean, sometimes life just, keeps us in peace.
Yeah. Being in the hospital under pediatric care is like a way more pleasant experience than being as an adult. When I was hospitalized one time, I was still 17 and I was able to be on the pediatric floor, and they give you like so many gifts and everything is decorated and there's so many games, and like it really makes it like a better experience. And then if you go to an adult floor, it's like the walls are white, everybody is angry, like every person that comes in to check on you is just like having a bad day.
The pediatric care seems like so much fun. Like, yeah, it's not nice to kind of be in a hospital and be sick when you're a child, but
Definitely.
But you kind of like feel at home-ish, and you try to with all.
Yeah, they really put in that extra effort to make you feel like more comfortable, less scared. And then it's like the second you turn 18, they're like, best of luck to you.
Yeah.
So,
goodbye.
Yeah.
So what were the first symptoms you kind of experienced to be actually diagnosed at 17? Like, what was kind of your past?
So I think about this a lot now that I'm older and like more stable, I would say. I think looking back on it, I had more symptoms before like this first episode that I consider to be like my big defining moment of like, that's when my RA started. But I was in college. It was like literally the third week of college. And everybody, is like trying to find friends. You're like trying to figure everything out. You're like, where am I going? What frat should we go to tonight? All these things. And I woke up like midweek, like a Wednesday, and could not raise either one of my arms over my head. Everything just hurt. Like I genuinely couldn't, like just doing this motion was like impossible. And I obviously didn't know why. Like I went to bed and woke up. I went to bed like a very healthy person, and I woke up a sick person. I went to my university's like infirmary, and they told me that my arm was broken, which was super confusing because I had gone to bed that night and woke up. Like it's not like I was at a party or did anything crazy or anything like that. And the school I went to is kind of notorious for being a party school. So the nurse actually suggested that maybe I was just really drunk and fell out of my bed, didn't remember. And I remember just thinking, I don't know why no one believes me when I'm saying things like, I don't know what happened. I think for some reason they needed a cause and effect, and I didn't have a cause. I just had this thing where I couldn't raise my arms over my head. So they put me in a sling. They took x-rays, put me in a sling. After that, I was sent to an orthopedic surgeon out where I went to college. And again, being 17, it was super weird. They wouldn't see me without my parent being present, but I was in college and my parents were about 3 hours away. So I called my mom, and they allowed her to give like consent over the phone. But it was this whole thing about getting seen. And I was like, I'm an adult, I'm in college, but my mom obviously is not with me. So that surgeon actually told me that my arm wasn't broken. They reviewed my images, and he, very kind man, he said, we see your injury a lot in people who play football. So especially quarterbacks. Do you happen to play football? And I, looked up and down and I was like at 5'3", like 110 pounds soaking wet. No, I don't play football. I'm flattered, but no, I don't play football. And then from there, it just kind of spiraled, right? I lost the ability to walk. I was spiking these really high fevers. They told me I would need surgery to repair the tendon in my shoulder, but I really do think I never got the surgery because I was just like, that seems weird. I didn't hurt my shoulder. And I do think looking back now, that was the beginning of when my arthritis really started. But it just was missed by so many people, right? Because you're young, you're healthy. How could you go from that to being like severely disabled, for lack of a better word? It just spiraled so quick. It's funny how things to get better take so long, but to get worse can go just like that,
Yeah. Wow. I mean, you were kind of diagnosed quickly, you'd say, right? Like,
I would say so. That winter break, I went to my pediatrician and she was like, you either have RA or you have Lyme disease. Obviously I'd never heard of either of those things before. So they did all the tests, whatever. Lyme is also just such a fascinating disease where they don't know, you can have all these negative tests, but still have Lyme. So I guess it's really hard to differentiate if you actually have Lyme or not, but because I have seropositive rheumatoid arthritis, I think it's easier to diagnose because all the factors and antibodies that they look for RA were all positive for me. So there was kind of no question that I had RA. So in terms of getting diagnosed, it took probably about 7 months to have that firm diagnosis, to rule everything else and have that firm diagnosis. But I have people I've met who've taken years to get diagnosed, right? Autoimmune invisible illness is so hard to diagnose because all the symptoms kind of overlap with each other.
Yeah, it is quite a challenge. I've introduced so many people on this podcast and most of them are just they've been misdiagnosed for the longest time. Their rheumatologist told them something different about what they
for
had.
sure.
The stories are just,
horrific. They're horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Honestly. And I'm glad that you were able, even though 7 months sounds like a pretty long time, compared to other people, this was kind of quick. Did you experience anything any challenges throughout your diagnosis period, or was it kind of straightforward-ish?
I think just getting diagnosed in itself, even if you have an answer, it doesn't make it any easier. Yes, what I had has a name and other people have it, but something that I really struggle with, and I still struggle with to this day, is every doctor I saw was explaining to me the science behind my disease, what my immune system is doing, what it's doing to my joints, how this medication stops whatever is happening from happening. But no one ever took the time to explain to me, every aspect of your life is about to change. Every single facet, whether it's, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, financial, social, especially social, everything changes. And that's something that I still to this day struggle with. I've been sick for 9 years. I've had 8 rheumatologists in those 9 years, right? I think it's really hard to find a doctor who you really click with, who is listening to you. I think especially when you have chronic illness or invisible illness, or unfortunately both, you are gaslit so much by medical providers, right? You're telling them, this isn't working for me. I don't feel good. This isn't right. And they're like, well, it should work because it works for other people. So it should work for you too. And I think it's hard to find a doctor who, when you say, I don't feel right about this, and they say, okay, let's work together. And finally, I found that in the rheumatologist I have now, but it took some time. And I think that's also something that people don't really talk about that much. I think is important. But I would say in terms of my diagnosis process, I would say, it's just overwhelming, right? I was one day fine. And the next day, all of a sudden I had rheumatoid arthritis. I think something that I also struggle with a lot too is everything changed, right, overnight. But at the same time, right, when you get sick at this pivotal age of 17, you are supposed to be finding yourself and creating yourself. And I went from this life that I had known where I didn't even know what rheumatoid arthritis was, or rheumatoid arthritis was now my entire life. And I think that's a really hard transition to make. Thankfully, I was diagnosed in what is considered a short amount of time, like we talked about, but I don't think it made it any easier for me in terms of transitioning.
Yeah. And you mentioned all those aspects that kind of changed once you're diagnosed. You mentioned financial and social. So kind of want to dive into how those actually impacted you. So especially the social, because you didn't mention that. one of the main ones. How did that kind of affect you? Like, obviously, you're in college and you
Mhm.
have this now known rheumatoid arthritis. How did it affect you?
Yeah, I mean, it still does, right? Like you're the effects of having RA are just not from in any autoimmune disease. You don't just have the symptoms from your disease, but also the symptoms from the medication and the treatment, right? Like these treatments are nuts. They're really heavy biologics. It's chemotherapy for life. It's all these things where you're like, okay, I can handle that, I guess, but something has to change, right? And in terms of social, I mean, college, right? College is like one of the biggest social aspects of your life. You're supposed to be, especially as a freshman, right? You're supposed to be going to parties. You're supposed to be like finding out what you want to study, doing all these things. And I was losing the ability to walk on my own. I was 79 pounds by the end of my freshman year. By sophomore year, I was in a wheelchair full time. So my social life was already impacted by that, right? Like it was hard. It was hard to keep up with like the social demands of college. But I would say people also don't understand, like innately, to explain to a healthy, I quote, healthy person, that like, hey, I just don't feel good today. So I know we were supposed to grab lunch, but I'm too tired. And people don't understand. People don't understand that like taking a nap is not going to fix it, right? Like I got 10 hours of sleep last night and I still feel like I get hit by a bus. So something has to give, right? And unfortunately, social interactions are the first ones to go. And it can be so hard, and being sick is already so isolating, right? Especially if you're young and all of your friends are super healthy and fit and do all these fun things all the time. And you have to start saying no. And then there's that fear in the back of your mind. The more I say no, the less likely they are to invite me somewhere, right?
Yeah.
College, right? There's so much socialization. There's floor activities in your dorm. There's grabbing meals with people on your floor and friends and going to study groups. And I was barely surviving, like getting up to brush my teeth and make it to class on time. So social impacts is really hard. Even now, right? As like an adult with a job and everything like that, there are days when I just don't have it in me to, go meet up with friends or do things like that. Cause I can't, right? I'm tired, I'm hurting. And I think it takes a toll on you mentally, right? If you don't have people around you that can understand, they're not understanding that, hey, when she says she doesn't feel good, it's not like, oh, she has a cold, then she'll be better tomorrow. Like it could take me a week before I feel better from a flare, or it can take me a few hours. Like it just depends. And I think that's the thing about having a chronic illness is nothing is ever consistent.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, sort of the aspect where even though you try to explain it to people, like what they think would be the solution is not ultimately what the solution is to help you. And it's hard to explain that to people because they don't understand what you're feeling, but they think that they understand, or they think that this solution will be okay and will help you. And sometimes it just takes sometimes you don't even need to explain what's going on in your body to others, but the fear of missing out is always a thing, and especially in like teenage years.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's also really hard to expect people to just understand. I think one of the most things that just really sticks with me about having a chronic illness, and it's kind of how I explain to people, is you don't get it until you get it, which is like so hard. I would never wish this on anybody. I would never wish this forced lifestyle on anybody, but you just don't understand until you can understand it, and you don't understand it until you actually live it, right? And explaining that to people is really challenging. And I think a lot of people, when they suggest things like, what about taking a nap? What about, my sister's best friend's niece's dog had this really great treatment option for their RA, and you should do that too. And 9.5 out of 10 times it comes from a place of love and kindness.
Yeah.
But it still makes it so frustrating. We were just like, I want to strangle you. Like that obviously is not going to work for me. Or I already tried that, or I'm not interested in trying that. Or sometimes you're just not interested in talking about it, right? Like I want to talk about literally anything else. I already live this life every day. Can we please talk about something else? I didn't come here to talk about like my diagnosis with you. And it can be hard to find that balance of they're being kind, and I want to, honor and respect the fact that they're being kind, but at the same time, like you would never say that to a healthy person, right? You would never go, "Ooh, the way you're walking is really weird. You should try this." Like you just wouldn't do that.
Yeah, you wouldn't. That's the thing. Unless you knew about something that was happening, like you mentioned. Yeah. And that totally makes sense. Like they obviously are doing it because they care about you and they want to, but sometimes it just gets really frustrating wherein they think they know more. I don't know, that sounds so mean, but
Yeah,
it just gets to you.
definitely, for sure.
So you mentioned that in your college years, you were like 79 pounds, you used a wheelchair for mobility, you had some high fevers, you were just like generally in so much pain. What tools did you kind of use to get back to a healthier version of yourself?
Yeah, that's a really great question, actually. Um, I think it's hard. I think when you are in like, I think everybody that's sick has a moment of rock bottom, right? And that moment can be a few weeks, months, years, whatever. When you are so sick and you don't think you can get any sicker, and in your journey, you don't actually get any sicker, you're just in that pit, right? Of just everything hurts, existing is hard. What am I supposed to do? Like, I hope it doesn't get worse than this. And after that, it starts to get better, right? It literally like moment by moment gets better. But in the when you're living it, it's really hard to see it that way. And it's really hard to, it's hard because it gets so bad so fast. And to get better, it takes so long, right? And everything has to change. There is, like we talked about, like there isn't a single aspect of your life that isn't changed by having a chronic illness. And I think in college, I was young, I was scared. Talking to doctors made me terrified. I had never known that you could have an illness for life. Like that never occurred to me. I think the media plays a huge role in the fact that sickness is always thought about as being acute, or it gets better or it goes away. And you never talk, it's never talked about because it's not sexy, right? It's not sexy to think like, I'm going to have this for the rest of my life. And I think in college, I was under the impression from my conversations with doctors, I didn't understand that this was forever. I had this mentality of, I just have to push through this because I don't know what this is, but it's going to be gone soon. And I just need to like keep going. So I still have my life afterwards. And I don't think that was obviously the healthiest, but I think it kind of goes back to doctor, patient conversations. Sometimes we're not on the same page. The doctor thinks that you're understanding what they're saying and you think they're understanding what you're saying. Everyone's all mixed up. And I think it can be really overwhelming. I mean, I was told at 18 by one of my doctors that I wouldn't live to see 20, right? Like I was really sick and they told me it wasn't going to get any better and staying in school was the dumbest thing I could do. And I need to go home, lay down and not do anything. And all I remember thinking to myself was the only normal part of my life right now as an 18-year-old is I'm in college, like most 18-year-olds that I know. So I'm going to stay here and I'm going to do whatever it takes to stay here. And looking back, I wish that I had taken some time off, obviously, but I didn't end up taking any time off. I graduated in 4 years, didn't do any extra semesters or anything like that. But I would say for things that helped me kind of survive and get healthier, I would say medication helped me to be able to function better. But I think medication is just kind of a double-edged sword because the medication, while it's helping with your joint pain, also gives you these like crazy side effects, right? Like I said, the medication we take is really intense medication that you're supposed to take for the rest of your life that really messes with so many other systems in your body just to try and help you function. And I think medication is a bridge to get people to where they can function. But I think that there needs to be more, right? Because you can't just rely on these drugs forever, right? We're young. We still have so much life ahead of us. We need something else. And I think that's kind of my motivation for doing other lifestyle changes that I've incorporated since college. But I think in college, getting through college, it was just this survivor mentality of push through. At one point, it's going to it has to get better because it can't get worse than this. Not necessarily the healthiest. I wouldn't like 10 out of 10 recommend on Yelp, but it got me here. So
yeah, now you realize you might have needed that break in college, but you got through. And if you don't mind me asking, what did you study during college?
yeah, so I actually started out as a biochemistry major, and I was pre-med before I got sick. So I always had this like vision of like, I want to tell people I'm a doctor, and had no idea about like health, wellness, anything like that. Just had a big ego, I guess, and wanted to be a doctor. And I started as biochemistry, and I loved my biochem classes. It was like things just kind of made sense to me. But my junior year, because of how much methotrexate, like chemotherapy medication I was on and I was taking, I wasn't able to actually be in the labs that corresponded with the biochemistry classes because I was severely immunocompromised and there was live strains of bacteria and things that we would be working with in the labs. And because of that, I wasn't able to graduate with a biochemistry degree. So I kind of had to pivot junior year, which is a really weird time to change your major. And I ended up in public health. I got a Bachelor of Science in public health, and public health is a very interesting field to me too. There's a lot of issues and disparities in health in the US alone, but also worldwide. And it just kind of opened my eyes to like what I'm experiencing checks out with like the way that all these systems are set up.
Yeah, and that's interesting that you mentioned that. Like, I'm also pre-med doing biomed and I'm first year, and I feel like it is a lot to handle, especially like you're living with a rheumatic disease and a chronic illness, and on top of that, like your joints hurt.
Yeah.
And the demand of the university, yes, you have accommodations. Every single day, it's like, oh yeah, you have a lab where like maybe a midterm or like maybe an assignment every single day. And I feel like I've gotten the accommodations I need, but sometimes I feel like I just need more. Like this is a lot to handle. I don't know if you felt that way. Did you get any accommodations?
Yeah, so it's actually a little backstory about this. So my brother is autistic and my mom used to be a special ed teacher. And so when I first was getting sick, my mom was like, you need to go to disability services. And me being a very thick-headed, like 17-year-old being like, no one knows better than me. I'm not listening to my mom about this. I ignored all that advice, obviously. And I just suffered and struggled, and I couldn't get up to get to class, and I couldn't get on the bus. I went to a very big school, like a very big campus school. And I couldn't get on the bus because I couldn't go up the stairs to get on the bus. So I was walking, but this is right before I lost the ability to walk. So it was more like dragging my feet. And I used to have to get up at 5 a.m. to make it to my 8 a.m. class on time because that's how slow I walked. And it was just, then I would get there and I'd have a fever and I couldn't focus because I was like, literally just the life was draining out of me. I felt like, and I had one class, it was a philosophy class. And it was Tuesday, Thursday, I'll never forget this, at like 5 p.m. And nobody ever went. Like it was a 300 person lecture, but like 15 people maybe showed up. And I always used to sit in the back rows on the aisle seat because I would have to get up, and I was throwing up so much from all the methotrexate, all the steroids, anything, like all the drugs for some reason made me throw up. And people always just thought I was hungover, which is terrible, but it was like 5 p.m. right? And I was like, you know what, today I am not feeling so bad. So small win, I'm going to sit one seat over from the aisle. Like it's weird if someone comes and sits right next to you when there's going to be all these open seats. So I was like, no one's going to sit next to me. And to me mentally, for some reason in my like weird sick brain, I was like, this is a big win. Like I don't need to sit on the aisle because I'm not going to get up to throw up. Yeah. And this girl comes and sits right next to me on the aisle seat. And I was like, well, this isn't going to be great. I know something's going to happen because she's right here. And class started, the philosophy lecture started. My professor was a very nice woman. And I just remember thinking like, all right, I can just get through this one class. It's an hour, I can do it. And we're sitting there and all of a sudden I can taste blood. And I was like, that's weird. And I like felt my lips and I noticed that I was bleeding. So I like bent over into my backpack to get some tissues. And when I sat up, there was blood coming out of my eyes, my nose, my mouth. I was bleeding literally out of every hole in my face. And yeah, yep. And I was like, okay, I need to like make it to the bathroom immediately. And obviously it's a terrifying sight. And we're in the middle of the lecture. Like, I just don't want anyone to stare at me, right? Like people stare at me enough. I don't want anyone to stare at me. So I was like very casually trying to be like, excuse me, ma'am, I need to make it to the restroom. And when she looked up at me to get up to go to the restroom, she screamed like bloody murder, high pitched scream. And everybody in the class, I mean, thankfully it was only 20 people, but everybody turned around to look at me, obviously. And I had blood rushing down my face. It was just a mess. I go to the bathroom, I clean myself off, and I get there as fast as I can. I can't walk fast either. So it's like hobbling out of the aisle, hobbling to the bathroom, getting there, being covered in blood. I obviously was wearing a white shirt. I'll never forget it. I had literally just blood everywhere. And because it turns out one of the side effects of methotrexate is like sporadic bleeding.
What?
And
I'm on methotrexate. Like I've never experienced that. Like
yeah,
thank the earth. But honestly, like that scares me. Okay, continue your story.
yeah, it was terrifying. And I come back after, I didn't want to come back in the lecture after I cleaned myself off. while people were still there. So I waited outside, and it turns out when I came back in to grab my bag after class, like I had gotten like a small drop of blood on her desk. That's probably why she screamed. But I remember just like packing up my bag and trying to get out of there as quick as possible, like trying to call my roommate being like, please come pick me up. Like this is so embarrassing. Like I need to go to sleep right now. Like I'm so embarrassed. And my professor came up to me and she said, I don't know what you're going through. You don't have to disclose it to me, but it appears that you are very sick and you should go to disability services. They can help you. And that's all she said. And I was like, wow, okay, if that's not a sign that I just bled all over this classroom and she's saying that they're going to help me, then that's fine. I'll do it. And I made my appointment to talk to disability services. The next day, my doctor wrote this letter being like, she's very sick. She needs all the accommodations she can get. And so part of my accommodations were, extra time in class, excused absences, for the days when I had really high fevers, prepared notes and things like that, because also my hands weren't really working at the time, right? So like taking notes was really hard, even on a computer. And then a shuttle to all my classes, which was really helpful. So I recommend everybody get hooked up with disability services. It's like the hill I will die on. Like you don't have to do any of it alone. Like there's no point. I was essentially killing myself to try and prove that I could do it by myself when that's so stupid, right? Like you can just get the help you need and it makes it so much better and so much easier and so much more attainable. Like you're just struggling for no reason.
Yeah. And so you've been through a lot. And I've just been listening to you for like 25 minutes and I'm like, she's been through so much.
Yeah, I've seen some bad stuff.
But right now, I mean, you're looking pretty happy, pretty good. So I just want to know, like, what are some changes? Like you mentioned lifestyle changes when we were talking before. What are some lifestyle changes you've made? Because I know, like, obviously medication, yes, it's really good. But, you mentioned you do some like lifestyle stuff to kind of, get through your day by day, ensuring that you're kind of having both and like making sure that you're healthy. So what do you do? I'm really interested and I feel like the viewers might want to know too.
In the beginning, when I was really sick, like I said, I was focusing on just like surviving, right? Like anything I could do to just help me survive, I was doing it. And especially once I realized that like I didn't have to do things by myself, it became a lot easier. I still struggle with asking for help. I think just really hard to do. But right now, what I'm doing, I actually recently worked with a registered dietitian who helped me with diet changes in terms of like reducing inflammation and things like that, which has been really helpful for me. And I saw like the biggest improvement, even with medication, with changing my diet. I mean, I've been gluten-free for about 9 years, and I've been dairy-free for about 2.5, 3 years. And those changes alone helped me out a lot. Personally, I have super high inflammatory arthritis. So like when I first got sick, my numbers were so far off the chart that they had to actually create a bigger chart for my numbers to be included. Yeah, so I can go at least down in the Hall of Fame for killing it on the inflammation markers, but that's about it. Yeah, so it just one of those things where it's like that helped me and people that I know it's helped, but also making diet changes is hard. I would say start small. And absolutely work with a professional. There was times when I tried to do like the anti-inflammatory diet by myself and it actually exacerbated my symptoms, which is not supposed to do. A lot of people do that and find a lot of relief, but for me, that didn't work. So I think a lot of managing chronic illness is a lot of, trial and error, figuring out what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what makes you feel better, what makes you feel worse, and write everything down. This is something that I totally overlooked when I was first getting sick. But when you go to the doctor and they ask you, like, how do you think you've been feeling? For some reason, all of us, I think our innate reaction is be like, I'm okay, I'm good, I'm fine. When in reality, like 2 weeks ago, I was in a lot of pain and I should have told them that, but I didn't tell them that. And then you leave the appointment being like, what a waste of money and time. Because now I wasn't honest. And I think a lot of us too, we struggle with trying to not be so burdensome. And so when people ask us how we're doing, we say, like I said, I'm okay, I'm fine. It's all good. When in reality, we want to say like, I feel like I'm dying inside because everything hurts. Nothing is making it better. And I don't know what I did for Commerce to repay me like this, but here we are. So it's one of those things where it's like, you can make lifestyle changes, diet, exercise. I lift weights about 5 times a week right now, which has really helped me. personally with my joints, but it took me a while to get there, right? Like I did physical therapy first. From physical therapy, I graduated to like light exercise. From there, I graduated to, I would say I do like pretty high intensity workouts now. For me, it's kind of like my personal release for stress, anxiety, things like that. But also it makes me feel so strong. And that is something that I think is so important, especially for women that struggle with chronic illness, is just feeling strong and feeling like you are controlling one aspect of your story, right? Like all of us, obviously didn't choose to be sick. None of us would choose to be sick for a lifetime, right? Unless you're an absolute psychopath who like loves pain, but you wouldn't choose to live like this, right? But if you can make choices that make it a little easier to live like this, then that's what we should be focusing on, right? And those are different choices for everybody. Whether that's taking hot Epsom salt baths, that used to help me so much, especially when my joints were really hurting. Changing your diet, adding in exercise, going for walks with friends, actually being honest with people in your life, saying like, I'm not doing well. And here's how I think you can support me and how I really could use your support right now. There's a lot of different ways that you can make it a little easier for yourself.
I think that's really important. Like you mentioned so many different aspects, and like specifically for me too, like a lifestyle change, like that's really helped me as well. And I think you're right. You can't expect it to work magically in a day. Like it takes time, and you gotta be strong. Like you'll see like pizza over there and you just gotta be strong. And I think especially for me, like I kind of think about, okay, like tomorrow, if I eat this, I will be in pain. Like, do I want to deal with that? And then I make that decision, right? So it's kind of just like being mature and knowing what could potentially happen, and you make that decision. If you're like, okay, yeah, like whatever, I'll suck it up and deal with it, then that's on you.
Yep, absolutely. And it can be hard too, right? Because then it goes back to the whole thing of like, everybody else my age, if they see pizza, they just eat the pizza. Like, why can I just not eat the pizza and be fine? And for me personally, like when I was first sick, that was something that I really struggled with, was just anger and bitterness, and just why me, that not necessarily victim mentality, because I think that you have to really like sit in it in order to become a victim mentality. But when it's so fresh and so new, you're just like, I don't understand what I did, like, cause and effect. What did I do to create this outcome? Because I didn't do anything. I was a good person. I was a good student. I was a good, whatever. And now you're living this life of like, I didn't deserve this. People like me don't deserve this, but you have to figure out how to, get through it.
I know for a really long time, like I was always like, why me? Like I literally ate healthy all my life. I like was a really good child. Why? Like why?
Yeah.
And I feel like a lot of people, like, I don't know if this is you, but for me, I've really tried to kind of make the best out of the situation now. Like you got to work with it. It's not going to be like, oh yeah, it's going to disappear tomorrow, but you got to work with the situation. So I'm really curious to know, like, how do you find humor in everyday situations, and how did your mindset kind of evolve?
Those two questions kind of go hand in hand for me. I would say that I've always had a pretty quick wit. My mouth gets me into trouble more often than it doesn't. But one thing that I really struggle with, and I think that a lot of people who use humor as a coping mechanism, is you are using humor to make other people more comfortable with what you're struggling with, right? Mm-hmm. Like Pete Davidson, perfect example, the comedian, he always makes jokes about 9/11 because he lost his dad in 9/11 as a firefighter. And I always think about that when I try and make jokes about having RA, or chronic illness, or not feeling well, or, almost dying in college. Like it's to make other people feel okay about it. And I think there's a really fine line of that being okay and then that being extremely problematic. And I think finding humor as a way to cope is kind of walking that fine line. And there are times when I've absolutely crossed the line, trying to make a joke, trying to make people laugh, and it just lands wrong, or it hurts somebody's feelings. And they're obviously entitled to feel that way, because what I said probably wasn't like the most tasteful thing to say. But I think over the years, I've learned to use humor to not make people feel okay, but to make it more digestible. So, when I talk about being 79 pounds, I think people have a really hard time picturing somebody, at 19, 20 being 79 pounds. And so I used to talk about my thigh gap a lot. Like I got a really sweet thigh gap from being, chronically sick. Like that was the best thing that ever happened to me, right? It was this dope thigh gap. And I think that made it a little bit more people could picture it, right? Like you can picture now, if I had a thigh gap, like you're picturing how skinny I was. And I think just small things like that really allow people anything. I'm just all about making sure that people are being educated by what I'm saying, especially when it comes to chronic illness. Like that's one of the reasons why I started my Instagram, was I want people to know what it's like, but I don't want it to be depressing, right? Like being chronically ill is already depressing, right? Like we're already sad enough. We don't need like people just talking always about how sad it is. You know, there's always humor in it, right? Like even now, like me bleeding on another girl's desk in college, it's like funny on the outside. When you dig into it, it's like, that's really messed up, but like it can be fun to be funny. And I think finding that humor for me really, really helped. You know, it's one of those things where it's like, it makes it just a little bit easier to get through the day, knowing that I can make the other people around me smile and laugh while I feel like, you know, crumbling inside, has made me more motivated to be like, what other funny things can I find about this? What other ways can I share my story that makes people laugh? And people, when you make them laugh, they remember, right? They remember it more than, you know, you making them feel sad or scared. People remember humor. And so I think it's really important for me, and like the way that I've handled my illness is to continue to find humor in everyday situations. I mean, it just dealing with it, right, is like inherently you have to laugh. Otherwise I will cry. So I laugh.
Initially in the diagnosis process, like you're already sad enough.
Mhm.
And at this point, it's like, you know what, like, yes, you have those days where you want to tell your friends like how you feel, how your life, like how your day went. And even if you bring up those sad stuff, like sometimes I just tell my friends, like I literally branch them and I'm like, okay, so next, can you now make me laugh? Like, please.
Yeah,
So,
100%.
like, and that's really, really helpful. It's like I just like, you know, spilled so much and how I felt, like how sad I was. And now you're able to, or I'm able to make someone laugh, and like that will change the whole vibe of the conversation.
Yeah, 100%. And sometimes too, it's like, you just don't want to be sad anymore, right? Like you don't
Yeah.
want to be thinking about forever being this way. So you just need to make it light, need to make it funny. At least for me anyway. I know not everybody sees it that way, but for me, that's something that I'd say like really helped carry me through some of the really dark stuff that I went through.
Yeah.
I used to make jokes like when my doctors would say things, right? Like doctors are inherently like not very funny people. So just like turning what they say to me as jokes, things like that, like I would say it, you know, it just makes it easier to survive.
I think everyone has their different ways of kind of coping and like
Yeah.
escapism. And it's like interesting to see how you use humor as like a form of like, you know, escaping and feeling like everything's all right. And that's great. And you mentioned your Instagram page. Well, I know what your Instagram page is all about, but I want you to tell everyone what it is all about, why you started it, what you're kind of hoping to achieve with it.
Yeah. I mean, besides making like $1 billion with my Instagram, I have many other aspirations for it. But I would say the biggest one is just making invisible illness more visible, right? I follow a lot of people that you've actually had on your podcast, like Effie and Cheryl and things, and they do such a good job of, you know, the education part of making everything about chronic illness, especially RA, like known, and all the ways we have to adapt and things like that. But I think my niche is more so like functioning as a quote normal person, right? Like, yes, we have to adapt, and yes, we need all these things to do what other people are doing, but we can also live like a pretty normal, again, I quote, life, right? Like once you get to a point where you are stable and you are healthy and you can function, we can do what other people are doing. I think one of the hardest things for me, and the reason why I wanted to start my Instagram, was that I never knew anyone like me in terms of like a young person who got this illness. And in college, I started a group for like chronically ill people in, you know, that are at school. And I had a couple people that came. It was a really small group, like very informal. A couple people that came, some kids with cancer, some people with Lyme disease, things like that. We kind of just talked about like what it was like. And everybody kind of had the same thing of like, I just wish I knew more people like us, right? And so I started my Instagram so that I could always be that person that's like us for somebody. I remember thinking so badly at 17, like, I wish I just knew that I was going to be okay, that there was someone like me that went through something similar to me and they are okay. And they're doing amazing things in the world. They're crushing their dreams. They're doing whatever. And I didn't have that, right? I didn't have that support, that one-on-one interaction with somebody. I had doctors telling me I was never going to be okay and you're never going to, achieve what you want to do. And I had my friends being like, you can do anything. I never had anyone be like, hey, I went through it. And if I can do it, you can do it. And so I never want anybody to go through that situation again without having that one person. Like my goal is to be that one person for everybody, right? Through Instagram or through whatever connection that we have. And I think it's so important for like the mental aspect of dealing with it. Like, I think when you have chronic illness, you get used to living in pain. It's just a part of it. Like, I don't even really notice my pain now, even though I can probably, like, if a normal person was zipped up into my body, they'd be like, wow, this is painful. But for me, and I'm sure you understand it too, like, you had it for a while, you just live, right? You get used to it. It becomes your new normal. I don't even remember my life, like, not having this disease, right? This is my new normal. But I remember in the beginning, like, yeah, okay, I can deal with the pain, but I can't deal with this like mental agony of like, am I actually going to be okay? Am I actually never going to be able to achieve my dreams, things like that? And so to have that one person, literally just one person, I think would have changed a lot of things for me in the beginning. And I think having an invisible autoimmune disease, like, you don't need someone that has the same exact diagnosis as you to have the ability for them to understand and empathize with what you're going through. Like, we all have very similar stories when you like get down to the core of it. And so I just think it's important to have somebody to like never walk any aspect of it alone, because you don't have to. And it's way scarier that way. But I like to share the physical activity aspect because, again, I was told I would never walk. So if I was told I was never going to walk, and now I can, I don't know, just like, for example, deadlift 165 pounds, like any one of us can do anything. And my wrists are completely fused. They don't move from just like natural disease progression. And so it's like finding ways to set up equipment, finding ways to make my gym sessions good for me and work for me. And it looks different than probably everybody else's, right? But I still get in there and I still try and do what I can and, just modify, right? You modify things to make it work for you. And that is inherently having a chronic illness and living with it, right? You modify, you adapt to everything. We're never going to be able to do, and I quote again, because I don't believe in it, normal things, but we try our best to adapt and overcome to be able to hit that starting line with our peers who don't have a chronic illness so that we can be on the same page as them.
It's really, really important to adapt and modify, and you only get kind of like the support from other people to even like accept what you're doing is okay. Like, sometimes you need some validation, most of the time you do. And I think like even having people support you and being there for you, family, friends. Yeah, thank you for sharing. Okay, so you just mentioned that your wrists are fused. How do you how do you modify things? Because they are, what are the limitations of that actually?
Sure. Yeah.
Talk about that.
That's a really great question. So if you look at an x-ray of a normal wrist, it's like a bunch of little bones in your wrist, right?
Okay.
And the space between those bones and the fluid in between all those little bones is actually what allows your wrist to move back and forth, side to side. And then you can put pressure through your hands and things like that. Because RA obviously attacks the like joint fluid first, there's no more fluid in my wrists. And because there was no more space, bone just grew over where all those spaces were. So my wrists are, if you look at my x-ray, it's like a golf ball and then my fingers. Yeah, it's like super not cute, but I mean, we're with what we got. So I don't remember, and this kind of goes back to it, like, I don't remember what it's like to not have my wrist being fused. I think about it a lot, and I don't know. Like, so I just know what I can and can't do with my hands. The biggest thing that I can't do with my hands, so they're fused in different locations. My left hand is fused so that I can go a little bit more back than forward. Like that's me flopping my wrist over. So it's not very far. And then the other one can go a little bit more forward, but it can't go back. So they're fused on opposite sides, which is like super not very helpful.
I was like, oh, let me just try to see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Every time I tell people, their first thing is like, you're telling them when they're like moving their hands back and forth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kiss your wrists, hello and goodbye, because they're doing you all the favors right now, being able to move them back and forth. But yeah, so I would say the biggest thing I had to adapt was opening containers. You don't realize like how much wrist you use. Turning keys, you don't realize how much wrist you use. There's a lot of things, a lot of like very small, mundane little things that I never really thought about that use, and it happens with any joint that you have that starts to erode from having RA. Having them be fused is challenging. Like I'll never be able to do push-ups or handstands or anything that requires you to bear weight through your hands. I mean, the push-ups I'm not really sad about because I don't need to
Yeah,
be doing those.
like I literally, my wrists, they have some damage, but they're not fused. I still can't do push-ups. So honestly, like, you're not missing out on anything.
Like physical activity limitations are the biggest ones. I mean, I say people with arthritis, even my fingers, like have a hard time opening jars and things. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily because of my wrists. Washing my hair, you don't realize like how much wrist bending you need to do that. Yeah, just little things like that where it's like, I wonder how this would be so much easier if my wrist would move. But
I mean, it's interesting to kind of hear your perspective because I feel like even for myself, like I remember when my fingers used to be really swollen, which they aren't right now. So, thank you. But like, I remember like I had to make my grandma wash my hair. Like I couldn't do it. It was really painful to like wash my hair. You've showed us how you've adapted and you're still working out and being healthy, which is like really inspiring. And I really hope that people are motivated. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that your grandma used to have to wash your hair because when I was in college, I have some of the best friends I've ever had from college. And I think it's because I got sick, who they used to have to help me do everything. And one of the things that people had to help me do was when I was in the shower, they would shave my armpits for me and they would wash my hair for me and they would do everything for me. One of my absolute best friends from college said that she never really understood how sick I was until she helped me put on my socks and I would cry. And like, I would say I cry a lot now, like as an adult, but before I got sick, I never cried. Some would say that's probably why I got sick and I really like handled my emotions very well. But yeah, I would say that like having people who can help you do those little tasks that you never thought twice about, like that was the biggest thing for me. I would wake up and be like, how the heck am I getting out of bed today? Like everything hurts. I can't roll onto my side because my elbows are stuck. I can't push myself off my hands because my hands hurt. Just trying to figure out how to survive, right? And you figured it out, right? Like you can probably wash your own hair. Now you probably figure out ways how to do it. I, for a long time, couldn't squeeze shampoo bottles. And if they didn't have like the one with the pump, I would literally have to like squeeze it together on my elbows or squeeze it against my chest just because, sometimes your hands don't work, but you'll figure it out. Like the human body is very adaptive, I think. And so there's always a way to do something, even when you think that you can't do it. If you take a deep breath and you come back and you say like, I'm going to do this. I just need to figure out what works best for me.
Thank you so much, Jody, for coming on today. I really had a great conversation with you. We touched on so many different topics. I could probably talk to you for another hour. And like, you have so much to share, and thank you for sharing. We talked about kind of your diagnosis, what it's like to, go to college with this diagnosis, some incidences that happen, some situations, but you've really grown as a person. So everyone, like, comment, subscribe, check out Jody's Instagram page, follow, take a look, get inspired.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
I can't hide, 'cause growing pains are keeping me up and